In this video, your instructor, Sam Shimizu Jones, walks you through how he takes and puts together a time lapse of star night photos and builds out a star trail photo like this. So check it out, and I hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, Sam Shimizu Jones here, and today we are going to talk about star trails. Now, this is a really cool photo technique that I'm still exploring, still figuring out, and have sort of gone through some trials and figured out sort of my approach to it. Now, depending on what softwares you're using, there's a few different ways to go about this. I'm going to share what I think is a relatively easy solution, and also one that requires Lightroom, but really any photo editing software, and then a free downloadable software that I found online that a few different photo bloggers were talking about, and that I think works actually really well. You don't need Photoshop, you don't necessarily need Lightroom. That's just what I use to organize my photos. But I think anything you use, you should be able to use this same basic idea to make a Star Trails photo. Now, as you can see here, I have one time lapse I did. Now, I was doing these time lapses for a video I was making, but then realized that I could also, combine all these photos to create a Star Trails image. I do one day want to do a, few hour long exposure and attempt to try and figure out the exposure settings to get the Star Trails in a single shot. But what I found the easiest way to do is to take many photos, stitch them together, and in that way you can show the movement of the stars in the night sky. So this is one that I did. I'll show you an example of that. It is not, I'm pointed south, not even south, sort of east, and it just didn't work. So I want to show you an example of one that did work. And if you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen this photo. So let's go into here, and all right, so here you can see this series of photos. You can see that I definitely had some fun with the editing of it. Let's see a few different options here. Let me move backwards actually. So you go out to take some night photos. In this case, I was out in Big Sur and set up my camera on a tripod, and I knew that I wanted to take, for this video I was making, at least 300 frames. And with that, in a 2398 timeline, I'd be able to get, at least 10 seconds worth of video. Now for the Star Trails, you don't need quite that many photos, but depending on where you're looking, the more the merrier. So set up on a tripod, I was doing 20-second exposures at f2.8, ISO 3200, and I was on my 16-35 2.8 G Master Sony lens on my A7R III. So that camera, 3200 ISO, it handles low light really well. You can see had a little bit of light pollution there in the distance. I was at 19 millimeter just to sort of get the full sky. And this is actually, it's not the moon, it's a planet that was just really bright and added a really cool movement in the video. It almost looked like a moon setting there. So when I went into here, I went and sort of edited this photo to make it look how I wanted it to. I then selected all the photos and I synchronized them so that they would all have the same settings. Now, depending on what software you're using, you might copy and paste the settings over, you might synchronize in Lightroom. It's this in the bottom right, there's a sync setting where you can sync them all together. And yeah, so you just basically want to edit all the photos to be the same. From there, export them all into a single folder, and as you can see, what I just imported, going to here, I have this one folder that has all those photos. Now, because of my A7R III, which takes very large file formats, you can see the export here. they're all around 30 megabytes, and that's not even at full export or full quality. But I now have a folder with all these photos. I then go in and open up StarStax. Now, StarStax is a free software. This guy, Marcus Enzweiler, he does self-driving cars. He's a computer engineer, all sorts of amazing stuff. Really kind of random reading the other stuff he does. But one of the things he does is he created this StarStax software. And he's now up to, I think, version 8, because with each new operating system, you have to update those things. But he has tutorials on here. He sort of walks you through how to use this software. It's very, very simple, but it can take your time lapse of photos, however many it is, and stitch them all together. He does have some sort of tips on here in terms of which settings to use. I'll go through those, and then you can download both Windows or Mac on here. So you can see here, marcus-enzweiler.de is where you'll find it. If you can't find it, I'll be sure to add a link so that you can find it. But if you just type in StarStax into Google, you should be able to find it. So you open the program. You can either drop the images here, or you can click in the upper left corner here to find the photos that you want to do. But I'm just gonna select these, click and drag them in. So this is 224 photos. It's not the entire time lapse, but it's a good amount of them. And from my experience, you probably really only need closer to maybe 50 to 100 photos. I think with the night sky moving, you definitely get enough. Also, if you've seen Star Trails photos, I think the best thing you can do is point your camera north, because everything in this galaxy universe, I always confuse which is which, but we're all rotating around the northern point. And so when you start to do these time lapses, you'll see that the stars are rotating. But if you point to the north, you'll see they all create a circle around this single point. That is the way I think you get the most dynamic shot. There's others that I attempted to do that you can see here, where it's still a cool effect. You sort of get this, movement, but it just feels a bit chaotic to me. It doesn't feel that sort of, circling Star Trails image that I really like and want to achieve in here. So let's go ahead. I go into here. Let's see. So blending, you have gap filling or lighten. Actually, if you just hover over this, it'll come up with all the different sort of what each one does. On his website, he recommends lighten or gap filling. Gap filling basically just means that as each photo's stacked on top of the next one, if you have a little gap between each photo, or whatever it is, it'll fill in the gap to make it a more complete star trail, opposed to having maybe a bunch of little dots. I don't know if you've done these star photos. You might see like a plane flying, and it'll be little dots every few centimeters or whatever it is, millimeters. You get something similar. So I like to use gap filling, comment mode, all these things. If you just hover over it, it'll tell you some little brief description of what it does. Comet star trails, which look like comet trails. So let's try it. Sure, why not? This whole program, what I've learned is to just test and see what happens. Background, this is just the background of filling in the image. I like to have it be black. I'll do automatic, compression best. All that is just general information. All right, so then once you've done all that, you go here, the fourth little button to the right. So here you have open images, open dark frames. So I do start processing, and now it's just going to go through each of them, and you can actually watch in real time as it blends all these images together. So we'll just sit here and let this thing put them all together. They are very large file sizes. It takes a little bit of time for it to do this, but we'll just do a little time lapse. All right, there we have it. We have gone through, and I mean, it's pretty cool watching it happen. Takes a while. That was a lot of photos, way more than I probably needed. I think probably 50 photos in, I was actually pretty happy with how it looked. Seeing it here, I mean, it's cool how many, how filled out the star trails are. There's sort of a brief, pretty minor tweaking you can do. So you can sort of see, you can see the overlay of the threshold. Basically, I don't know. I guess this is something that you sort of mess with. I can't really see that it's doing that much. That definitely does. So this is the amount of gap filling applied. So how much between the stars is it filling in? And this is all just something that with this program, I sort of take little by little and sort of see what looks best. We'll try and do something like that. And then from here, I just do Command Save or Command S. I'll save it to my desktop. Now, I'm still perfecting the star trails, I guess, but this is like a really easy, takes a little bit of computer processing, but really just editing all the photos so that they match in settings, so that they look the same, and then going into Star Stacks, hitting start basically, and it does the rest for you. Here was 300 photos. You really don't need that many. This was closer to 50 photos. You can sort of see that there's a beginning and an end to a lot of the lights here, or to the stars. And I think that's kind of a cool look when you have enough stars. And I love, coming up over a horizon. I think that's a really cool look. And then this was that same photo. You can see though the difference. This one I used less photos, and so I think it sort of made certain things look a little bit better. Like here you can see that multiple cars hadn't passed yet, so the application didn't start doing this weird trying to diffuse the highlights, whereas here it looks a little bit more natural, and you're not necessarily losing a whole lot in way of star trails. So if you're going to do this, what I would recommend, go out clear night when you have good astrophotography conditions, and take a time lapse, maybe 50 photos, maybe 100 photos, somewhere in that range. Most cameras nowadays, I know Nikon pretty much always has. I know Fuji does. I know Leica does. I'm not sure about Canon. I would expect they all have built-in intervalometers. And so you're just going to tell the camera, take a photo every, let's say, do a couple test photos. You do 20-second exposure. You get all your settings dialed in. You're like, okay, that looks like a good photo. You then set up your intervalometer to take a photo every 25 seconds. So it's taking a 20-second exposure, a little bit of buffer room, and then it'll take the next photo after 25 seconds. So 5 seconds to buffer, basically. And then tell it to do that for 100, 200 photos. Sometimes they do it by time, sometimes they do it by amount of photos, but I would just, probably max out at 100 photos and then see where it goes. Now, I got lucky. There could have been clouds that came into my shot. There could have been any number of things that would have made it so that this shot didn't come out. But over time, I think it's just being out there, taking the photos. Hopefully you get good conditions, and then bringing it back into your photo editing software, editing one photo the way you want it to be, copying those settings onto all the other photos of the time lapse, exporting them all together, and then into one folder, bringing that one folder then into Star Stacks, and then blending them all together. I'd recommend playing with the settings here, whether it's gap filling or lighten. It's all just, it's fun to play with, and you ultimately get really cool, unique looking photos. And make sure you point north. I think it looks more interesting. That being said, point it in other directions, see what you can get from the star trails. It's really interesting to see how they all sort of move through the sky, but you can't do it until after the time lapse. So anyways, hope this has been informational for you all. Thanks for tuning in, and I will come back with another video next time I get out there and practice the star trail effect again. So thanks everyone.